I'd like to welcome you all. This is the first kickoff for this year, 2021. We are extremely excited about going forward with this committee. We had, despite the pandemic, we had a very robust year. I tell you, our committees were so active. We had so many great meetings. I have tried, since it's pretty easy to try to just at least listen in, to attend almost all of them and share cross-cultural or cross ideas with the team. But it's been amazing, the agendas you've worked on, the things you've accomplished. We've had some extraordinarily vigorous team leaders, co-chairs. So I wanted to give a special thanks to all of you. Our membership is over 460 people, I believe, and growing still. So we really have a lot of people who are participating. And any of you that are not on a committee, please let Carolyn Bevins know that you would like to be on a committee, and you're allowed to be on more than one. And so another opportunity is when you are on a committee, we are very open about ideas that you want to bring, as long as they're really related to mental health and criminal justice. We do some overlap work with opiates, but there are a lot of task forces working on opiates, so we try to really focus on mental health issues unless they have some overlaps. But please bring those to your committee. The only caveat we have with our co-chairs is that we need to be sensitive that this is the Attorney General's task force as well. And so if there's a politically sensitive issue, we need to make sure we clear it, and our co-chairs will be aware and alert to that, to clear it with the Attorney General to make sure that it's not conflicting with his agenda in his office. But that has rarely ever happened in the 8 years that I did this with Attorney General and Mike DeWine. I don't think we had any issues, and so far none here, but just always wanted to make everybody aware of that. Another opportunity we have this year is the CARES Act. There's a lot of money coming down. There's a mental health block grant, which has a lot more freedom and extends for a couple of years instead of trying to force everybody to spend it immediately, and not so closely tied to COVID uses. So your committee should really think about things that you can apply for that are related to whatever your projects are that might need a grant. Lori Chris, who heads Department of Mental Health, is looking for ideas for expansion of this block grant. And so this is an opportunity, if your project requires funding, to look at that. The only caveat on that one is you have to be aware that it's a short cycle funding. So you don't want to build up a program that hires 10 people and then in 2 years the funding's gone and you can't sustain it. So try to keep that in mind as you develop your programs. How do you then sustain them afterwards? How do you build in long-term longevity with that committee and not have to just all of a sudden fire a bunch of people because you ran out of the grant monies? We've had that problem in the past with some large grants. So I wanted to make sure you are aware of that. We're also very closely coordinating with Recovery Ohio. Many of you have gotten notices of meetings for Recovery Ohio to work on different command centers of different issues. Unfortunately, one of them is going to be happening that I'm on the committee of right during this meeting, so I will have to catch up with them later. But we had a joint meeting with our chairs and the chairs of the committees for Recovery Ohio last year. We're looking for one probably in February of our co-chairs this time, and that we will be working with the Recovery Ohio. All of our different co-chairs will be coordinating with Recovery Ohio. Their new command centers, or I'm not sure what they're calling them now, but maybe Kelly can tell us that because she's probably more integrate to that group. But the command centers are opening up to outside membership. The original groups were administrative folks only. Now they're opening it up to broader partners. And again, we want to coordinate our projects with their projects. So we're going to have that joint meeting. So as many of you as co-chairs that can attend that, we would appreciate that. Then in the last meeting that was focused on housing, the Attorney General, who was able to give us some greetings, announced that he wanted to have a committee focused on the effects of COVID on mental health and criminal justice. So I've met a couple different times with Director Chris and Director Nelson of Recovery Ohio and these command centers that they're putting together. And they have delegated to us the command center for issues regarding reentry and specialized dockets and the effects of COVID. Now we have a reentry committee, which is putting this program on, and we have a specialized docket committee with Chris Nicastro heads. So they have a broader mission. The mission of this one will really focus on the effects of COVID, and particularly they're concerned about a lot of the jails doing early releases, not keeping people in the jails, letting them out in community, but there aren't the supports in the community. We're seeing dramatic rise in homelessness from those that are released from jail without those supports, rearrests and then re-releases into the community. There's challenges that specialized dockets has with probation. How do you maintain social distancing and masks and have conduct in-person meetings with specialized dockets, or the probation officers supervise without the contact, or how do you do urine screen? Just a whole host of issues which really overlap with a lot of the reentry issues. So they're really closely aligned and have the same mission. So this new committee is temporarily called the Surge Committee, just because I need to give it a name. Surge is really the bigger description for all the effects of the pandemic and the virus and the consequences on opiate overdoses and suicides and etc. So we have challenged our Surge Committee to come up with more definitive title that they will rename the committee, and the co-chairs are Emily Pelfrey, who is the current co-chair of the Juvenile Committee, but she is a former prosecutor. She really understands the system, and she's going to be the Attorney General co-chair. And then we're very proud to announce that Dustin McKee is going to be co-chair. Dustin has been heavily involved in stepping up for years, and then he left stepping up and became executive director of Make a Day Foundation, which does all sorts of reentry work with Franklin County now. So he is boots on the ground, connected to the system. And then Dr. Jeffrey Hunter, who is chair of the Psychiatry and Treatment Committee, because that is a very integral part of this, is going to be sort of like a special advisor to them, helping them through that. He's a physician, he's a trained CIT police officer, and the company he works for, his job with that company deals with all the COVID issues in the health space. So he's very well suited to give some background advice and be part of that team. That said, we have, I think, co-chairs. Almost every committee has given us a representative for that committee. We have just 2 or 3 that we're still looking for, and we'll be reaching out to you personally if you haven't sent someone in already. But now we're opening it to the public. So if anybody's on this meeting that wants to be on that special, now named Surge Committee, but to be renamed, and wants to be part of that group, please email Carolyn Bevins, not me, but Carolyn Bevins. She's maintaining the roster. She'll get the list to the co-chairs, and they're going to meet a lot more frequently than quarterly to get started, because the issues are urgent and very important to the Attorney General. So they'll meet more frequently to get started and get going, and then we can go from there to longer breaks. But I imagine this is going to be a very active committee because of all the issues, and because there are opportunities, as I said, with the CARES funding. So those are some initial thoughts and that I wanted to share with all of you. We've been really excited. Our housing committee that we did by Zoom last time, 4 teams, I can't remember which, was extremely well attended. It was a very good program, very robust. Unfortunately, we didn't think to record that one, and we had so many requests for the content. So we've gotten a little wiser now, and I have a very good friend who has done all things with me on veterans for years, is recording this. Sometimes the websites for the state don't have the bandwidth to put a long recording on. So I have a YouTube that he maintains that I know nothing about, and I have no idea how to run it, but Pete Miller runs it for me. We have the Veterans Conference that was held in November on that YouTube. If you have any interest in veterans, go on that YouTube, look at that. It's broken out into segments so you can watch segments. It was one of the best conferences I've been to in my 40, 50 years. So it has a lot of wonderful meat that would be helpful if you're interested in veterans issues. And we will put this recording on YouTube. It'll take him a few days to get it together and edit it. He does an excellent job of putting titles on and everything like that. So that will eventually be on the YouTube, and you'll all get a link to that so you can share it with other people, or if you have to jump off early, you can get back on and watch the rest of it. And with that said, I am now going to turn it over to our two co-chairs who have, again, they're one of the very active, robust committees. They have just a ton of stuff that they present and talk about and do in their meetings. And I reached out to them for reentry for our next subject because it's so prevalent right now with everything that's happening. And that was all I had to do. They ran with it. They designed the program. They got the speakers. It was like easy to manage. So I thank both Kelly and Linda for your diligence and help in putting all this together. And again, wanted to thank all of you. And I'm going to go off the video and off the mute, or go on mute now, so that everybody can focus on the reentry program that our two chairs are going to present. So thank you all.
Thank you, Justice Stratton. I appreciate all the efforts that you're doing. It's all such important work, and we're excited today to share a little bit about the work that Linda and I have been doing. So my name is Kelly Storm, and I am the Behavioral Health Operations Director within the Office of Correctional Healthcare, which is within the Ohio Department of Rehabilitation and Correction. And I'm relatively new in my current position. Teresa Jameson was in the position prior to me and actually was co-chairing this committee prior to me stepping in. I have lots of experience within ODRC. I also worked with the Department of Youth Services and in the community as well. I am very excited to be co-chairing the Diversion and Reentry Committee with Linda James, and we're excited to present what we've been working on, as well as a great panel today for our discussion.
Yeah, great to see everybody today. I can't believe how many participants we have, but I think that really speaks to the important work that this task force has done for, gosh, I think 5 or 6 years now. But as Kelly said, my name's Linda James. I'm the Chief Operating Officer with an agency called ALVIS. Many of you may have heard of us. We're a community corrections agency primarily, but we also serve developmentally disabled people, and also we have a behavioral health track as well, where we provide substance use disorder treatment and mental health. I too have a background in the Department of Rehabilitation and Correction. I was there, gosh, about 27 years, and then worked for the Department of Youth Services before coming to the private sector at ALVIS. So great to see everybody.
So we just wanted to start before we introduce our panel of experts who are on the call with us today, what our current committee focus is, what we're focusing on currently within our committee. So that way, if you're interested in joining our efforts, you have the opportunity. As Justice Stratton shared, I am involved with Recovery Ohio as well. So I co-chair the Criminal Justice Recovery Ohio Committee with Jennifer Roach from the Ohio Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services. And so it's great to have this natural intersection as well with these two offices that are doing great work. So when Linda and I first received this committee, we heard about all the great stuff that they had done in the past, and we kind of jumped right into what can we do right now and where should our new focus be. And what we decided is we really wanted to kind of divide and conquer reentry and diversion because there's such large lifts within our systems. And so with reentry, our evolving goal is that we're trying to develop a high-risk transition model to ensure pathways to relevant programs and services are available. So making sure that we have more pathways of care and links in between all of our services that we provide, and that those services are talking. Right now, our targeted focus for the work group is we're leveraging and expanding existing peer support programs. So we are working with the Ohio Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services office that focuses on peer support and having a really in-depth conversation about what's existing, what's needed to kind of get to the next level, and how can we best utilize and educate on those. And we're also partnering within the Ohio Department of Mental Health, with Ohio Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services within ODRC to actually start certifying individuals incarcerated with peer supports. So what we're doing is we're piloting it at 3 facilities. We are going through the training process, and then once they're in the community, as long as they meet the eligibility criteria, they would be then able to certify and find work in that field. So that's exciting that we're actually doing something in the reentry space and inside the fence that kind of meet in the middle.
As Kelly said, we really wanted to break our committee into kind of two work groups where we could accomplish things a little more quickly. I also want to just say that we are very mindful to make sure that we're consistent with other groups so we don't duplicate, we don't head in a contradictory direction. So all the work we're doing, we're reaching out to Recovery Ohio, we'll be reaching out to the new Surge Committee, and any other committees that are doing this work so we can make sure that we're in step with them and that we're maximizing our resources together. So in the diversion section, our evolving goal is to expand opportunities in general for any early intervention and diversion opportunities from both jails and prison. And what we're going to be focusing on specifically is two-pronged. We're lucky in the state of Ohio, the Department of Rehabilitation and Correction has developed two amazing programs called Treatment Transfer and Transitional Control. And both of those programs allow an inmate to get out early from prison. They are placed in a halfway house where they receive treatment for substance abuse, mental health services, job seeking, employment, education, and other general case management services. So the committee really wanted to work with the department and really focus on increasing those numbers who have that opportunity. We know through research that both of those programs actually reduce recidivism. So you may think of that as a reentry initiatives, which it is on one hand, but by reducing recidivism, it's actually a diversion so they don't go back to prison, which is, of course, the goal of those two programs. We also want to strengthen the communication between ODRC and the specialty dockets, whether that's a reentry, a mental health, veterans docket, whatever it is. We also, our committee really wants to focus on participant engagement. Especially during the pandemic, we know that there's been a lot of difficulty with those participants meeting all the requirements of those specialty dockets. Unfortunately, we see a lot of absconders and some other issues. So our diversion subcommittee really wanted to talk through with the Supreme Court and judges and others to see how we can be helpful in strengthening the specialty dockets across Ohio.
Thanks, Linda. So if you or your committee are working in any of these spaces and you have anything that you'd like to share forward with us, or if you'd like to participate, we're going to actually at the end share the last slide, which again is just our contact information. And we'd love to hear from you because partnerships really make the work go so much further. And so we're excited to share kind of what we're looking at with you. But what Linda and I are most excited to share with you guys today is we have a great panel for all of you that are going to be speaking about the work that they're doing in all of their areas, you know, both COVID related and non-COVID related. And so we're really excited to welcome them. So today on the call, we have Roxanne Coey, who is from the Ohio Department of Rehabilitation and Correction, and she is the Assistant Deputy Director of the Office of Reentry and Enterprise Development. Chris Galley, who also is from ODRC, and he is the Chief over the Bureau of Community Sanctions. Chris Nicastro from the Ohio Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services, who is the Chief over the Bureau of Criminal Justice Services. And Kristen Palmore, who's from the Ohio Department of Youth Services and is the Deputy Director of Community Engagement and Reentry. And I know these names are probably not new to anyone on this call because they have such a great reach into all of the work that we're doing, and they are just great advocates for you know, reentry, for diversion, for patient advocacy. So we're really excited to have them on the call. And we just want to thank them for participating today and for sharing all of the great work that they're doing in their own spaces. I'm going to stop sharing so we can see their faces a little bit better.
Great. And I too want to thank our panel members. We really appreciate you being here. Your names are so well known in the community, and you've been doing this work a long time, and we appreciate you sharing that knowledge with the group today. All right, so let's go ahead. This will be confusing having two Chris's, but I'll do my best. I guess we'll have to use last names. So Chris Nicastro, we'd like to start out with you and pose a question. Can you tell us about the partnership between OMOS and the Department ODRC regarding how community linkage services are provided?
Sure. Well, good morning, everybody. And first off, I want to just thank Kelly and Linda for including me on this panel, and obviously Justice Stratton, but also it's good to see some familiar faces along the way as I'm looking at that. I think there's like 70 plus people that are participating, so that's fantastic. So yeah, so the Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services and DRC have partnered in regarding community linkage since the early 90s. And the community linkage actually started as part of what was called the Dunn Decree. And if you're familiar with the Dunn Decree, that was a result of the Lucasville riot that happened in 1993. So at the time, it was actually the Department of Mental Health was providing mental health services inside the prisons. And the prisons wanted to basically mimic what was going on in the community as far as how the community providers were providing treatment to those individuals with severe mental illnesses. So what they did is they went ahead and started hiring their own staff to provide those types of services. And what we wanted to do is just like if an individual is in a psychiatric hospital, there's good discharge planning from the hospital to the community. We wanted to also to do that as well. So what we did is we hired community linkage workers that would be actually work inside the prisons, and they would meet with individuals prior to the release from prison, and they would complete kind of like a biopsychosocial assessment. We call it a community linkage packet. They complete that packet, and then they send that information on to our community providers. Then in turn, our community providers review that information, decide what course of treatment is best for that individual, and they will give us back an appointment with the date and time and who that individual will be meeting with. Our community linkage workers then meet with that individual, and they actually give them an appointment time and date so that person knows where they're going and who they're going to be seeing. So I will say, you know, our program started with 7 community linkage workers across the state in the prisons. We have expanded quite a bit. 9 years ago, I think we had our first big expansion. We started doing community linkage with DYS. And we're still doing that. So we do community linkage for all the youth that are on the mental health caseload there as well. We've continued to expand now that the managed care plans have a significant role in reentry planning with our individuals coming out of DRC. We share community linkage packets with them, so they know in turn where those individuals are returning, and also who they're linked up with as far as their behavioral health services. And then also 5 years ago, we started the community transition program. So we did a rather large expansion. We basically doubled our work staff, and in addition to serving individuals with severe mental illnesses, we now also link individuals that have participated in recovery services programming as a result of having a substance use disorder. So, and I'll talk a little bit later on about the community transition program as we talk more about our reentry programmings, but that's kind of a quick description for you to get started.
Wow, Chris, that is amazing. Just the expansion over the years, and talk about a soft handoff and continuity of care. That's a perfect model, and that's awesome that you've now started to do that with DYS. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
So Roxanne, we'd like to move to you. Can you tell us a little bit about the strategic plan that you have in place at the department moving forward in 2021? I know, as all of us, we're still being impacted by COVID, but we'd love to hear the details from you about that.
Absolutely. Thank you, Linda, and thank you, Kelly, and thank you, Justice Stratton. I appreciate being here today. So our strategic plan moving forward, we have really 3 action items and 2 administrative that I think really apply to the men and women being released. So one of the big things that we're working on is the creation of, and we haven't determined the name yet, whether it's mentors, coaches, navigators for the men and women being released to assist them through the reentry process. We have a lot of volunteers that want to come into the institutions, but reentry happens in the community. So we really want to engage those folks to help with that transition, and help them deal with, you know, the obvious needs of reentry, but also deal with that affective piece, that silent struggle of reentry, having these men and women to really just help guide them. And we know from literature, we know from talking to restored citizens, that desistance from crime really includes a lot of emotional. There's loneliness, there's isolation, and these navigators can really offset those things that can lead them back to engaging in old behaviors. So with the navigate, I'll call them navigators for right now. We want those men and women to be connected to a reentry coalition. Lots of eyes on people to not only protect our navigators, but unfortunately in this work, we find that some people engaging in reentry with formerly incarcerated men and women, sometimes their intentions aren't always wonderful. And so lots of eyes and being connected to a coalition also really serves the other side of the coin to protect our men and women being released from being taken advantage of, from human trafficking, you know, all those things that could put them at risk also. We really want to build that relationship, strengthen. We have good relationships with the coalitions, but build that and really bring a united approach to the reentry mentors. And so that plan is being designed. And when I talked to the person over that committee this morning, wanted to make sure I was giving you right information. He also told me that there's an education program being developed also. So we're not just throwing men and women as a navigator. Here's what the needs are of our population. Here's what you're going to experience. We really want to prepare them for long-term engagement with the formerly incarcerated adults. The other thing that we're doing inside the institution is working on what we're calling a reentry or transition syllabus. And we know that through ORADs, the men and women incarcerated have a case plan. But we kind of wanted to take this a little bit deeper, more of a personal development model, and ask these men and women, what do you want to accomplish to prepare you for going home? So it's more than just programming. Do you want to get involved in the Red Cross program, the NAACP? What programs and activities do you want to engage in? And we wanted to set that up somewhat like when we were in college. You know, I don't know about anybody else, but I was checking boxes every semester. Like, how close am I? I wanted to see my progress. And we want the men and women incarcerated to actually be able to see, hey, you're making progress. You're taking steps towards your goals, and you're doing great. Something to encourage them more often than just a program or just a vocational program, which are very critical to reentry, but we wanted to add this other element to it. One of the third action item that we're working on is meaningful family engagement. And so first of all, we had to define meaningful. And there are lots of opportunities for family members to come into the institution and celebrate a graduation, celebrate a program completion. But we wanted to take that beyond a celebration and really engage the family into that reentry process. And so we created this this kind of title called Healthy Family Transitions, and we've been working with restored citizens. We've been working with family members. One of the first components, it's going to be like a catalog of different workshops for family members and incarcerated adults. And so the first workshop that we've completed is going home, the first 72 hours. What does that look like? We know, again, about reentry, that first 72 hours is critical. What we've learned from talking to men and women who have been released, who are still incarcerated, is that you ask them about their reentry plan. Well, I have a job to go to. I can go here. I can go there. And really, when they come out, there isn't that job. That housing plan has not worked out, or it has worked out, but they haven't communicated with the person they're living with, whether it's wife, brother, mom, dad, whoever. So the incarcerated adult has some expectations. However, the person they're going to live with also has expectations, and sometimes they are not coinciding. So we wanted to provide an opportunity to really have some meaningful communication with the incarcerated adult and the person or the mentor that they're going home to. You know, what is your expectation? And, you know, the brother might say, look, I need you to find employment. I need you to be a part of this family. And the incarcerated adult sometimes feel like, look, I need to de-stress from prison. And there's where the problems begin. So really want to create these workshops and plans for people to really communicate and come together and help families understand the struggle and the decompression time that's needed for men and women coming home, and help the incarcerated adult understand the expectations and how can we work together to make this a smooth transition for the family as a unit. So some of the other things that we really want to put into that series is relapse recognition. A lot of men and women work on a relapse prevention plan, but family members know they can see the signs when somebody is getting ready to relapse, ready to go back to, you know, their thinking, their behaviors. They start kind of getting a little bit secretive. We want to really open that up and make that a big piece of communication. So if a family member says, hey, you're kind of going down this road of you know, I don't want you to go back. Let's be able to create some space for a meaningful conversation. I think another big thing that we want to talk about and create is that medication education. There's a large percentage of our men and women that leave with, whether it's medical or behavioral health medication. We want families to understand, what does this medication do? Well, how is it helping them? What's the importance of it? And so to help support the formerly incarcerated adult in maintaining that for their health, for their cognitive abilities, all of that. So those are some of the big three actionable things that we're working on. One of the administrative things that we're working on is measurement and tracking the work that we do. And we want to look at not just output. We can count numbers, we can report that out in annual reports, but really we're really trying to figure out how to measure outcome and impact, because the things that we do, all the things all of us do can have a huge impact, and it's hard to capture just by numbers. And so we're really trying to look at that social return on investment and the quality of life. And we want people to not just survive. We really want these men and women to thrive afterwards. And how do we take a look at that? And then the last administrative thing that we're doing, ODRC has what's called, and Linda, you'll remember this, the Reentry Program Oversight Committee. Still is in existence, and it's gone through some iterations over time. And as the chairman of that committee, we really what we do is take a look at programs. People submit program submissions, and we review them. We really want to deliver evidence-based programming to our population. And along with that, we want ODRC to be a learning organization. And so everything doesn't have to fall within one category. We want there to be a lot of different programs because people learn in different ways. So everything, I know cognitive behavioral is a stress for changing behavior. But if somebody brings an art therapy class to us with an affective component that shows to change behavior, let's try it. Let's do it. If it's shown to change people in positive ways, let's bring it. So we're not really shutting off new ideas for us to be able to continue to learn as an organization. But so that's a little bit about the Program Oversight Committee. But what I want to do, and this is my specific goal, is capture the programs that we've reviewed, give a description of these programs, because I think when men and women apply for judicial release or early release, or men and women going before the parole board, I think people aren't aware of the programs that we're offering, that they've engaged in, and what they do. And so I want to create an online application for them. If someone says that they've completed the New Directions program, I want the parole board and judges to be able to know, what did that program, what's the purpose of that program? What is it that we expect the men and women to learn who have completed that? So parenting, domestic violence, thinking for a change, inside out dads, all these programs, we want to really inform the parole board and inform judges of what these men and women have actually done so that they can make a holistic decision about whether deciding if these men and women are ready to be released. So, there it is.
Thanks so much, Roxanne. I could listen to you all day.
Oh, Kelly, thank you.
Comes out of your shop. And I just think, you know, what's so important for people to hear is that need for that cross education, right? Like there's so much going on inside the fence, so much great work that all the different areas are doing, and especially reentry. I mean, you guys have just really shown up, especially during the pandemic. And I know you're going to share some of that information later on. But just that survive to thrive, right? Like we're really about the business of, you know, these individuals coming home to your communities, and for them to come home and be thriving community members. And I think that's what's important to remember about the work that we're doing within corrections. And sometimes, you know, it doesn't translate, or people don't want to reach in, and so we have to reach out. And I'm excited that you're constantly reaching out, and that you're reaching out and engaging people to reach back in. So great stuff.
Thank you.
And Roxanne, I too could listen to you all day long and appreciate the work you're doing, but I love that you finally put a name to what we've all known when you say the silent struggle. We all know that, and it's so emotional for people getting out of prison, but I don't think I've ever heard a label put on it where it's descriptive, so I appreciate that.
You know, Kelly and Linda, the work with Restored Citizens is immeasurable, really. And talking with them, and so many of them have allowed me to just ask them, tell me about this. What was this like for you? And when I said, it's almost like a silent struggle to a small group of Restored Citizens. One of the gentlemen he'd served almost 30 years in prison. He said, Rox, that is it. That's it. There's so much internal that we can't even discuss. And so thank you. And that came from them. And it's just, I think about listening, and I think it's about having a willingness to learn from everybody.
All right, Kistin, and I apologize about the phone ringing in my background. Obviously, I'm in the office right now. Kistin, let's move to you. How has the pandemic specifically impacted your services at DYS? And if you could let us know what practices you think that even after the pandemic that you'll carry forward in the agency.
Well, first, excuse me, I haven't been talking, so my voice is a little scratchy, so forgive me. But first of all, I want to thank Kelly and Linda and Justice Stratton for inviting me. One, I want to really thank you guys. I mean, I think it happens because you guys have had some experience in working in DYS that we are able to be here. We often get overlooked, and so I really want to thank you for an opportunity to talk about youth and reentry, because it's important that we understand that some of the struggles that our youth are having are exactly the same struggles that our adults are having in the institution as they are returning to the community. Fact is that what we need to do is really up our game, because we want to make sure that we can prevent further penetration into the criminal justice system. So it is really, really important that we have some of the same protective factors that the adults have, that we have in the youth arena. And so I'm thankful to Roxanne and DRC, because they allow us to pick their brains, and they're always willing to work with us when we are coming up with some ideas or thinking about things differently. And to that end, I guess I will start going into the foray of the question. So one of the things that has happened, especially for my team, And one of the things that happen is reentry has to be, it's a hands-on, face-to-face kind of opportunity. But we can sit in our offices and think about it. And when I was working in the community, I would always say, you know, if I'm in my office, if you see me in my office for 2 weeks and I'm not writing a grant, then I'm not doing my job. And so this pandemic has really hamstringed our reentry administrators. Our hands are tied because we spend a lot of time in the community, in community meetings, and networking with service providers, and providing that face-to-face contact. Because usually what happens is we go to a meeting and we meet someone and you're like, hey, yeah, that's a great idea. And those types of meetings have been closed. And so you're not able to go to those things. So that has been a really big strain. But one of the things that we have been able to do is that we have been able to continue to do our individual treatment plans through and our release authority. We make sure that we are at each and every one of the individual treatment plans for our youth. As much as possible, we are at our the release authority. And so we have 4 of our reentry administrators who are covering North and South and East and West. So we have each of them representing their particular area and working with the youth that are coming out of that area. And so we do our best to make sure that we are on each and every one of these meetings. And I think for efficiency's sake, although we would like to be able to talk with the youth face to face, but I think that practice may continue in limited circumstances, you know, when we have, you know, inclement weather, or if it just doesn't make sense for a travel to that particular area. But so we will retain that, but for the most part, we will be there face to face working as soon as we can. I think we're trying to figure out ways to provide virtual engagement and programming for our youth. We have adopted virtual visits, and that has been very, very helpful because a lot of our parents who have not been able to visit with their youth have had an opportunity, and so that has opened up opportunities for family members to have a more consistent contact with youth, which we know whether you're an adult or a youth and you are incarcerated, that family support, that family connection has a great impact on behavior and your outlook. What we need to do is instill positive outlooks on our youth so they feel that they have a future and hopeful. And that's something that, you know, it is very difficult to provide within an institutional setting, but family members and opportunities within the community. As Roxana said, that, you know, reentry is local. We can do as much as possible to try to bring in community providers in the facilities, but it really starts in the community. And so as much as we can start making inroads in the community to open up opportunities for our youth to come to be able to make a successful transition, we are open to that. So we are working to begin opening up opportunities for community providers and community service providers, as well as community organizations, to do some virtual programming. We're in the process of creating a process similar to DRC, where we have a committee that looks at services and programs that are coming in, and because what we really want to do is stress that we need to have meaningful opportunities. And although we are a 24-hour operation, we need to make sure that it's not always a cognitive behavior type of programming, that we also have, you know, opportunities for our youth to distress. So we want to make sure that we have a balance. And so we are creating a committee to review those, and so that we can figure out how we with three of our organization, all three of our facilities, that we have a balance of both, cognitive behavior as well as recreational opportunities. And rec is kind of difficult to do when you're in a pandemic, right? So you can't share balls. You have to be 6 feet away. So that has been quite difficult to try to figure that out. But we are moving in units, and that has substantially curtailed the spread and has lowered the incidence of altercations because they're moving in units. And so we may continue that if that has some efficacious. So we're examining that. So we have a committee that is looking at ways to make sure that our youth are being engaged, but at the same time reducing the opportunities for conflict.
Thanks so much, Kristen. As you were speaking, I was just reminiscing on my days at Marion Juvenile Correctional, and I couldn't imagine life at a youth facility without recreation. And it's just interesting sometimes to hear, we don't always get to hear exactly what the other areas are doing, but I love some of the stuff you're doing, and I'm just going to let you know I'm going to reach out and email separately because I want to pick your brain about some of the ideas that you were talking about. So I'm excited about, the virtual programming and things like that, because I think we're all looking at getting just a little bit more creative. Emily Haynes actually asked a question for you, Kristen. Have you been able to connect teachers from the youth's original school or the school the youth will be going to afterwards virtually while they're incarcerated? We
have. We've done virtual tours, and I was going to get to that when we were talking about seamless transition of successful reentry. But we have been able to connect. Teachers are talking, and our superintendent of schools has been talking with superintendents of other schools in the community, and working out opportunities for the youth to have conversations with the school principal in preparation, and for individuals who are looking to go on to post-secondary education. We have been able to arrange tours virtually. So yes, that's continuing.
Great. Well, I'm just going to echo Emily, who says she's so impressed and glad, and I also am impressed in all the things that you guys are doing. So great work.
Thank you so much, Kristen. Last but not least, we're going to hear from Chris Galley. Chris, we thought you could start out by just telling the group how you do a lot of diversions in the Bureau of Community Sanctions, and you fund those through the department. Can you just explain a little bit about the number of diversions that you help communities with, and maybe the difference between jail and prison diversions?
Sure. Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Kelly, Linda, Justice Stratton, for inviting me and allowing me to participate here. Before I get straight into the diversions, let me just give a little bit of background on what the Bureau of Community Sanctions does. I think with this many people, it may help because we touch a lot of different things, and then I'll get into the diversion piece. So Bureau of Community Sanctions, or BCS as we call it, we monitor grants and contractual funds provided to local jurisdictions and not-for-profits across the state to develop community sanctions and residential services. So one easy way to kind of think about all the funds that we have is we have basically residential services and sanctions, and those include licensed halfway houses, community-based correctional facilities, community residential centers, which are basically a housing program, community transitional housing program, which is a housing program, and a contract with Corporation of Supportive Housing for permanent supportive housing. So that's our residential side. In the residential side, I'll also mention this because Linda, you mentioned it in the beginning. We also oversee the transitional control and treatment transfer programs that transition people either 180 days or up to 365 days prior to their end of their sentence into our halfway houses. We monitor and basically work with our halfway houses on those two programs. So that's the residential side. And then we have the non-residential side, which are basically subsidy grants to probation departments, courts, counties. You may have heard of TCAP, Justice Reinvestment Incentive Grants, JRIG grants, CCA grants, community. Wow, I'm blanking. I never call it by its full name anymore. Linda, help me for a second. I'm drowning. Community Correction Act. Sorry. Holy cow. How can I forget that? Community Correction Act grants. So those are our non-residential pieces. And so all of those grants, we basically fund almost every single county probation department in the state. We also fund municipal courts and county courts along with common pleas. So that's kind of a little bit of the background. In fiscal year 19, just to give you kind of a level, we distributed over $215 million out to all these different programs, residential and non-residential. So there's 250 plus what I'll call prison diversion grants and programs, and over 100 jail diversion. And I'll make a distinction between those two. And that'll get me kind of to answering this question. In fiscal year 19, we diverted basically 53,000 different people, 52,978 participated in our programs. So our prison diversion programs, you can simply think of it as any program that is an alternative to going to prison. So diverting you from prison, and likewise for jail diversion programs, diverting you from jail. The way the funding mostly works, you can also think of prison diversion programs will go and deal with felony offenders, since those are the only offenders that can end up in prison. And our jail diversion programs mostly deal with the municipal level, because they can only go to jail. And so that's a way to kind of look at how our funding is distributed and what some of those terms mean. Really, I guess I'll leave it there. There's some other questions that we'll touch on things, but I don't know if anybody has any questions for me, but I'll hand it back over.
I just want to say thanks for giving that background, Chris, because I don't think many people know within the Bureau of Community Sanctions how many counties you touch, how many cities you touch, and with $215 million, that's pretty amazing. And I almost shudder to think what the jails and prisons would look like without those programs. So thank you for doing that, and thank you for your.
I will add this. So let me also say, the focus obviously of all of these programs is not only diversion, but to reduce recidivism overall. So Linda didn't mention it, but part of her 27-year career was sitting in this seat as the chief of the Bureau of Community Sanctions. And back when she was here, she basically started the path that we are on in conjunction with the University of Cincinnati, and really focusing what we do with our money on evidence-based practices and things that actually make a difference in work, and putting in standards for our grants and our programs to say, no, great, you want to do all these things, but do you have any research that says does any of that stuff work? And if it doesn't, then we need you to move over here and start focusing on these types of activities. And so, you know, I would say starting way back, well, 20 plus years ago, the Bureau of Community Sanctions really had a significant effect on what happens and how our probation departments and how our halfway houses and CBCFs have transitioned and moved and bought into using these particular activities and doing all these things to really make a difference and to try to change offenders' behavior. Whereas, you know, I was a PO back in 1996 and 1997, and it was, speaking of checking boxes, it was checking boxes. Do you have a job? Are you showing up? And are you not getting arrested? That's what the job was then. We are not anywhere near that. It is, what are you doing, PO or halfway house or CBCF, to help develop skills with that particular person in front of you so that they make better decisions, that they don't come back into the criminal justice system. And so there's a commercial, but we've been, you know, doing this thankfully with, you know, she put us on a path a long time ago, and we're still driving down that path, going a little left and right as things always do. But, you know, the Bureau has had, I think, a significant effect on Ohio's criminal justice system from the probationary and day-to-day work with our offenders, in my opinion.
Thank you, Chris, for those kind words, and appreciate the chats from folks too. And before I blush anymore, I'll move on to the next question, but thank you, Chris, I appreciate that. Roxanne, let's jump back to you. Can you talk about how community partnerships can best help with reentry efforts? Are there things that we could do beyond the reentry coalitions that you could share with the group? I know there's a lot of diverse backgrounds represented here, so I'm sure they would be interested to hear how they could step in and assist with those efforts.
Yes, thank you, Linda. I think really what those relationships are built around is establishing relationship and good communication. Communication from the folks who want to be a part of it. What's your strength? What do you want to do? How do you want to give back? And I think that the other side of that is us being able to communicate, DRC, DYS, us being able to communicate, this is what we need. This is what our folks need coming home. So I think that we can do better, DRC, we can do better educating people about what the struggle is and what our population needs, making that transition back to the community. And it goes beyond the first 72 hours. It's the first 30, 60, 90 day, you know, the first year of coming home. There are big adjustments. And so I think communication is the biggest issue for that.
Okay, thank you, Roxanne. Chris Nicastro, can you talk with us about how the ADAM board support diversion and reentry efforts across the state? I know they don't work directly for OMAS per se, but there's some direction and funding. Could you share with the group about that relationship and what the ADAM boards across the state provide?
Yeah, absolutely. And for those of you who may not be familiar with ADAM boards, there are 50 ADAM boards across the state. Most just cover one county. Some of them cover obviously multiple counties. And when we talk about diversion and reentry programs, at least for our area, you know, we consider that to be such a fluid process. So I will say a good reentry program probably is also a good diversion program, and vice versa. But in general, we have several programs that we work with our ADAM boards to administer in regards to people leaving either prisons or jails. The first one that I'll talk about is with our prison population, and that's called the Community Transition Program. And that started about 5 years ago as a result of when the Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services took over recovery services programming inside the prisons. And just a quick background on that, prior to that, the recovery services staff were DRC employees. We did basically a lift and shift is what we called it, and all those employees became Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services employees. And we were also able to increase the capacity of those employees by about 50%. So we were able to greatly expand the amount of drug and alcohol treatment services that were happening inside the prisons. And as you guys all know, the majority of individuals inside the prisons have a substance use disorder. So obviously, there's a great need for those services. Historically, the way programming was run is if you didn't have enough time on your sentence to complete drug and alcohol treatment, you didn't start it. So we wanted to change that because we also know that many of our people that have substance use disorders are what we call short-term offenders or nonviolent offenders that have short sentences inside the prison. So what we wanted to do is allow individuals to start treatment services inside the prison and then transition and continue those services in the community. And that's how the community transition program started. So we've been running the program for about 5 years. Initially, the first 4 years, CareSource was running the program. With the new administration, when they took over, we shifted from CareSource administering the program to our ADAM boards administering the program. We did that for a couple of reasons. The biggest reason being that we wanted the ADAM boards to have the flexibility to run their program the way they wanted to run the program, because different board areas have different needs. You may go to one area and like Cuyahoga County, you can give somebody a bus pass and they're fine. You go to a different county, like Wood County, there is no public transportation. So they may want to spend more funding on transportation or things like that. So we wanted to give the boards the flexibility to run the program that they wanted to, which would be best for individuals leaving prisons. So in order to be eligible for the community transition program, you have to have either been a part of recovery services treatment or have a severe mental illness. So basically, the community transition program, or CTP as we call it, is an extension of the community linkage program, which has been going on for years, which I talked about during my first question. So it's just now we have funding behind it to basically provide services for people as they transition back into the community. I also talked a little bit about the managed care plans. We have a fantastic program called the Medicaid pre-release program. When I say we, it's really DRC and Department of Medicaid, but approximately about 85%, and don't quote me on that, but I think it's about 85% of individuals leaving prison walk out with a Medicaid card. So that alone is just an unbelievable reentry program in itself. So if you have individuals walking out the door and they have a payer source for behavioral health services or medical services, that's an amazing thing. So with that being said, most of the people that leave prison and go into the community transition program, they have their Medicaid cards, so we don't have to pay for treatment services. So what we do is we pay for what we call as recovery support services. And those services are very broad. They can be things like a welcome home packet, which can be as simple as a toothbrush and toothpaste or toiletry items, to a gift card to, say, Walmart so they can get groceries and things like that. I agree with Roxanne in that it's not this isn't a 3-day transition. It's, with the community transition program, we allow 1 year or longer for people to participate so they have time to get back on their feet. A lot of the recovery supports go to things like transportation. Like I said, that's huge. Housing assistance can be used with these funds as well. We also contract separately with Corporation for Supportive Housing. They run a program that's very similar to Returning Home Ohio that has been going on for years within DRC. So we contract with them to provide permanent supportive housing and rapid rehousing for eligible individuals as they leave prison. So so that's what's going on with our prison population. We also have a number of programs going on at more of the local level. For example, like with our jail programs, we wanted to, gosh, years ago when ODATIS and the Department of Mental Health consolidated, we developed what we call our behavioral health and criminal justice programs. And basically what we were looking for was to have our behavioral health authorities, whether that's a provider or an ADA board, usually it's an ADA board, and our law enforcement, which is usually the local sheriff, just basically to get together and come up with a program that would benefit individuals that are incarcerated in the local jails. So programs are run a little differently. In general, what happens is, if I could just describe a general program, is what they do is they screen individuals as they come into jail. They then provide appropriate treatment for them during their incarceration in jail. And then they mimic a little bit of our community linkage program, and they link individuals to services in the community as they're getting out. So, and funds are paid for differently. Some jails elect to hire staff to actually work inside the jails and do social work things. Other programs use more of their funding on recovery supports at the back end. So it just depends on what's needed in that area. But we've found that those programs have been very successful. And we've seen with those, just the partnerships grow between the sheriffs and the behavioral health people, which is wonderful. Another jail program that is the funds go through the ADA board is called our Psychotropic Medication Reimbursement Program, and that is exactly what it is basically the Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services received $5 million this biennium to reimburse jails for psychotropic medications. And when we're talking about what medications are allowed, it's all the medications that are on the Medicaid formulary and actually a few more. So as people go into jail, if they had a severe mental illness and they were on medications, now the jails have a payer source for those psych medications, which can be fairly expensive at times. So people can continue to take their medications inside the jails, and then as they are leaving the jails, they're certainly more stable because they're on those medications. The other good thing is, obviously we have a number of people that go in between our psychiatric hospitals and our jails, kind of back and forth. So the good news is, when a doctor at a psychiatric hospital starts somebody on a specific medication, that's the formulary that we reimburse for, so they can go to the jail and they don't have to worry about, gosh, how much is this going to cost to continue to, pay for these medications for this individual. It's pretty much covered. And lastly, about this program, we're really doing a push on long-acting injectables. We've seen evidence that shows that individuals who are a good candidate for a long-acting injectable, what I'm talking about is like an antipsychotic medication that would last, you give someone an injection and it can last a couple weeks to a month. Those individuals that are on those have shown, a reduction in recidivism and just have done better off as they leave the jail system. So we actually, if I can just do a quick shout out for my committee, we are doing a webinar and we'll set out more information in mid-March on long-acting injectables, and we're hoping to have a pretty good turnout with that. And then finally, I'll just talk a little bit about our CIT expansion project. So CIT, obviously, we're training police officers and law enforcement on how to handle someone that has a mental illness and how to de-escalate that person. We, for the first time, really received a substantial amount of funding to support trainings in that area, and we're working very closely with the Criminal Justice CCOE, who is administering the program, and Ruth Samara, who I'm guessing is probably on this call as well, to expand trainings across the state. So we're training law enforcement, probation officers. Now, I will say, obviously, with COVID, right, our trainings halted for a while. We still have had some completed. We've actually, some good news as far as with COVID is, they developed a virtual training So that's, I guess, a positive that has come out of the pandemic. But hopefully, as we move forward and we can see the light at the end of the tunnel with this pandemic, we will continue to start really seeing a ramp up in different types of trainings for law enforcement. So there are other programs that we do, but I'll go ahead and stop there. And if there's any questions, I'd be glad to answer them.
Thanks, Chris. You can always say we when it comes to ODRC because you're part of our family. Chris
Yes.
was my supervisor back in the day at ORW, so always have a place with us. And I think we say we a lot too, right? Like it's just kind of interchangeable with what a great relationship we have, which I just think speaks to the importance of partnerships. So Sally actually had a question for you, Chris, and it says, can you discuss whether any of these programs apply to folks leaving forensic beds in the state psych hospitals?
Yeah, so the programs that I was talking about were specifically about people leaving prison who would not be on forensic status. There could be the programs I talked about with the jail. You could use the funds for those people if they're leaving from the jail and on forensic status. That's probably not that often. We do have other reentry programs out of our hospital service department. We have a program called Access to Success, which is fairly similar to that. As people leave the state hospitals, there's funding behind them to help them with certain types of recovery supports and treatments and housing assistance. But these are more specific to the criminal justice population. So it's kind of tricky. You think of forensics, sometimes you think of criminal justice, but we tend to separate them a little bit between forensic people and criminal justice people.
Thanks, Chris.
Sure.
And we should probably echo Sally's comment about Eve Stratton and how she was instrumental in with the Steppin' Up group and others to make sure that those dollars were available for psych meds in jails. So thank you for that, Justice Stratton. All right, let's move on. Kirsten, let's get back to the juveniles. And let me just say, when I moved from the Department of Corrections, and at the time we had over 50,000 inmates, to DYS, and there were less than 500, I thought, gosh, this will be, a piece of cake. And gosh, was I wrong. I couldn't have been more wrong. That's why I hope, to Kirsten's point earlier, that people don't forget about the youth, because they are young people with more trauma than I ever could imagine. And it was a very difficult job because these kids have just been lost and have terrible, terrible backgrounds. And we need to do everything we can. But having said that, Kirsten, what does a successful transition look like for a youth? It's so different with the youth and adults because they have different needs and they're going home often to parents that maybe aren't the best place for them. So could you talk about what a successful transition would look like for you, for our youth?
Sure. And sometimes if you look at the news, you see that it is very, very difficult, right? With the spike in gun violence during the course of the summer and throughout, and a lot of the youth that were, a lot of the gun violence were youth who had there are any organizations that are truly open now because of the pandemic, so that is an added barrier to a successful transition, right? So when things are closed, or one of the things that, and we'll probably touch on that when we talk about challenges, but when things are closed due to the pandemic and you can't actually have physical contact, face-to-face programming, that also has a substantial impairment into providing successful reentry. But to answer the question, and it would start, and it does start in DYS, as soon as a youth comes into the facility with the reentry, as well as parole and all the other services combined, to make sure that we are surrounding this youth with all of the needs, because we have the most high needs and high risk youth that are coming into our facility. So we don't get your status offenses. We get the youth who, if they were adults, they would be in DRC. So to try to give people some idea as to the type of youth that we're dealing with. And so, making sure that we have those risk needs assessments. And from the very beginning, parole, making contact with families, because we need to begin to prepare youth to go home from the time they come in, because one, that we don't have them for very long. Our average length of stay is 17.2 months. And that's a very short period of time to try to make sure that we're getting all the needs being met, because our average entry into our facility is around 16. And only having that 17.2 months to try to make some inroads and getting some, pro-social activities and understanding what pro-social activity is, doing some, cognitive redevelopment and behavior modification. Well, we can only do that for that 17 months, and then they go home and they're right back into the same communities. And so what we have to do is to do a bifurcated approach where we're simultaneously working with the families and understanding the communities that they're going into, at the same time that we're working inside of the facilities, working with the youth to make sure that their educational needs are being addressed, and doing cognitive assessments, and making sure that if they have any intellectual disabilities, that they are addressed, doing and having an IEP if it's not been addressed in the community. It's oftentimes difficult. We have to go through a lot of red tape. If it hasn't been assessed and they're like 16 and they're in our facilities, unless the teachers and the superintendent have a really, really good sense that, yes, there's some cognitive behavior here, as well as some mental health behavior that we need to do an IEP, an individual education plan. That doesn't happen, and it's unfortunate, and it's a state regulation that we need to work on to ensure that we are equipping these young folks with the ability to be able to go through life and not be hampered by any barriers that relate to the cognitive behavior or even intellectual behavior, so that we can get them to understand how to deal with those. And of course, dealing with behavior health issues. 66% of our population is on the mental health caseload. So we're dealing with trauma, childhood trauma, deep childhood trauma that we need to unpack. And it's, of course, when you're dealing with childhood trauma, that is a lot. I mean, as we know, for individuals who are in our prison, we know that is really deep-seated, and it takes years to be able to unpack that and to be able to deal with. We're dealing with a lot of childhood sexual abuse and dealing with those. And our behavioral health services now, unfortunately, as well as fortunately, during the pandemic, we have been able to have more behavioral health sessions, because now, as I said, we work in a unit, and so now these units are becoming cohesive, and so they are kind of like being policing of themselves to ensure that when they're in a behavioral health meeting or session, that they're saying, hey guys, let's get down to the business. And so it's not the whole trying to, this particular unit is not dealing with this particular unit, so we don't have any of that. So they are really being able to see a greater number of results and a lot more time on behavioral health sessions and dealing with some of the core issues that our youth have. And then also making sure that one of the things that we do is we make sure that every youth that comes out, they have their birth certificate and their social security card, and that they're able to convert that. That's where parole comes in, to be able to convert that into a state ID. And so when we have youth that have out-of-state birth certificates, we go and we apply for those birth certificates, and then we work with the Medicaid organizations to verify Social Security numbers if we get youth who don't have a correct Social Security number, to verify that Social Security number, and then we apply for the Social Security card. So we create what is called My Important Document portfolio, so that the youth come, they have their actual birth certificate, their Social Security card, any of their certificates that they have achieved, we place in there. And then we work very closely with the Attorney General's office to ensure that if there have been any fraudulent charges in a youth's name while they have been in our facility, that we work with the Attorney General office to get those off, so they're not hampered with fraudulent charges already when they leave, so they are able to, when they're 18, if they're leaving at 18 or they're leaving at 21 and they are trying to get their own car or their own place, that those charges don't come up and prevent them from being able to get credit. We also, as I alluded to earlier, we work with the community to try to make sure there's a seamless transition in education, and working with we have St. Clair College and several other community colleges that we are working with to bring in vocational as well as secondary. One of the things that I'm pushing for is, now that we can do virtual, is that we don't necessarily have to be working with an Ohio institution. We can be working with other institutions who, because now we have virtual classrooms. We have been working with ATLO. Our youth have tablets, so when we do a hybrid model, so our teachers have been very, very engaged in putting on, we have several products that we have been able to put on their tablets so that they can engage in continue education opportunities. And then we are working with their Ohio Department of Job and Family Services to create a career, well, we're working with the Career One Stop, so that we are working constantly trying to get youth into in-demand jobs that they can actually afford. And I'm working with some of the organizations, with the community action organizations, to bring in some of the construction trades to be able to see if we can work on apprenticeships to try to get our youth jobs. And then, really working hand in hand with behavioral health, parole, as Chris Nicastro said, that working with them to making sure that we have community linkage, and that parole is working to ensure that we follow through. And then there is always a conversation with the Ohio Public Defender's Office, talking to the youth, getting them the information about, okay, what their particular offense and what collateral consequences are attributed or associated with their offense, and then looking at them and saying, examining their case and saying whether or not they would be good candidates for having their records expunged after that 5-year period of time. Also working very closely with DRC and the liaison to see if we aren't able to get our youth a CQE. And so working on those. And then also making sure that when we have a youth coming out, that we're having those community connections. We have been working with the Ohio, I always get this wrong, the Ohio Opportunities for Disabilities. I always get that, OOD. I know it as its acronym, and that's not necessarily its actual name, but working with OOD to ensure that individuals who have those disabilities have a connection and be able to do some vocational assessments to determine where they may be most effective, and dealing with their career trajectory and making those inroads to employers to work with them to make sure that they are versed in employment and getting them connected with employers or educational opportunities, and if there is some remedial education that they need to be able to do some of these jobs, that they get those those as well. And then making sure our parole officers, when we are in reentry, constantly saying, hey, we have this done, have you followed up? And one of the things that we're working on is that we also have presumptive eligibility and making sure that there's a connection when they come out into the community to really get those that Medicaid certified that they are now moving from presumptive to actual Medicaid eligible. And I'm going to be picking Roxanne to try to figure out how we can get our 21 and older, well, our 21 who are aging out, to get them Medicaid certified and get phones for them when they're working out. So Roxanne, I want you to put that on your radar. So I will be calling you and trying to work with you in your Medicaid contact to see if we can't do that. So we are really trying to make sure that we have a seamless operation, and that even all some of the things that DRC is doing to ensure that reentry is smooth and successful, that we are mirroring and when we can. And then working with our community partners as well as working with coalitions to ensure that they stand up their juvenile forums or their juvenile committees to ensure that we can get more active participation in the community.
Kristen, that's all such great stuff. And there's a lot of chat going on in the chat box. So check that out, because some of that is definitely tied into you. And I just think what you said about like that gainful employment and teaching skills that will actually translate into the community is so important. We need to be using every second of every day to really prepare individuals to go back and to thrive, which, you know, we've kind of talked about throughout this. And you talked about that and a lot of other great efforts, including the opportunities for Ohioans with disabilities, and making sure that connection is there and that they are placed on an individualized pathway. And what I heard you say multiple times, maybe not with this same word, but was just like individual care and looking at the individual needs of the person. And that's great stuff, because it's not as easy as putting one program in place and having it capture everybody. You guys are really kind of deciding which ways to go, and definitely check out the chat. There's lots of great stuff in there specific to some of the comments that you were making as well.
Thanks, Kristen. Lots of great information going on in DYS, or great projects. And again, I'm just so grateful that DYS is doing what they are for the youth. Let's go to Chris Galley. Chris, could you share what BCS, Bureau of Community Sanctions, has planned for 2021? And then when you're done explaining that, if you could just jump into how the pandemic has impacted your services and what practices that you think you'll carry forward.
Right, sure. So I guess first, instead of talking about what's planned, I'll start with an interesting program that we already put in place basically in the fall, and that's our temporary shelter program. So what's interesting about this particular program is that it focused on the offenders leaving our prisons that are not on any type of supervision. So all of the other programs that BCS does, the halfway houses, the community residential centers, the community transitional housing programs, all of those things, one of the criteria is you have to be on post-release control supervision in order to gain access to any of those programs. So then we have people leaving prison that do not leave on supervision. They don't have parole officers. They are free citizens, and when they walk out that door, that's it, and they don't have access to all this. Of course, you know, Chris's team with Community Linkage, they provide all of those types of things, but DRC never had a program that would allow for any type of services for those folks. So as a result of the pandemic, we had an opportunity, and we spoke with our halfway house programs and said, hey, we have people leaving prison that still do need housing. And that's their main issue and need, and it may not necessarily be met in the community right away. So is there an opportunity that if essentially DRC would pay for that stay at the halfway house, would the halfway house be willing to allow that person to stay there? And basically it's room and board. And we worked out a program. We did it very quickly. We did it probably over the course of 2 months. Worked out the process. Essentially, the process is the case manager's in prison about 30 days prior to the end of their sentence. They speak to them. They talk about all their community linkage plans. Where are you going? What are you doing? All of that. Sometimes these folks say, I've got nothing. There's just nothing out there, and I have no links and no support. Well, this is just another option, and they can present this option to them. Okay, well, I understand that you're worried about that and you have that difficulty. Here's an option for you. When you're released, you can go to a halfway house and be housed there. They will provide you shelter and they will feed you. You do have to, abide by the rules of the halfway house. So obviously they can't go out and, grab a case of beer and come walking in the halfway house like they're going home. There are rules, and we explain that to them ahead of time. But that is something that's never been done. We got it off the ground very quickly. Of course, the challenge is because they're not on supervision, there's not a lot that we can do to, make them stay there. So it is completely voluntary. They do have to abide by the rules of the halfway house, and the halfway house can say, you're not abiding. Unfortunately, we're going to have you try to find another place to go. But we have had more interest than I actually thought we were going to have. We had got well over 50 referrals that have gone over to that program. The number that have actually shown up, because that's the other thing, we can't make them go, has been lower, but the halfway houses will also work with us. If that particular individual says, I don't have transportation, I have no way to get there, halfway house will come pick them up. So we've taken care of all of that. They can stay for a week, they can stay for 2 weeks, they can stay for 10 hours. There's no rules about, length of stay. It's completely up to them. It's voluntary. Up to 90 days, we'll take care of it. We will consider special circumstances if we need to extend beyond the 90 days. But basically, the halfway house will be talking to them, doing other linkages with the community, but just trying to take care of that hard break right from prison, and then not having a parole officer to walk them through things. We're pretty excited about that. And while it was, probably started as a pilot, I don't think the department will ever go back on that. I think that's here to stay. That is kind of answering the next question also a little bit. So temporary shelter program, we're excited about that. It just gives another option out there, and we need as many options as we can when it comes to housing. So, and we've had some people go through it successfully already, and hopefully they're continuing on their journey. In terms of planned reentry initiatives, first and foremost, our plan, cross our fingers, is to hold on to all of the funding and dollars that we currently have. So we're not, in terms of our grants, we're not planning on making any substantial, significant changes to those opportunities. Obviously, we have to have the dollars put in there in order for us to support all the things that we do, but we're not making any major changes right now. Administratively, we are working towards moving all of our grants administratively to 2-year grants. Right now, all of the non-residential are on 2-year grants. They used to be 1 year, which meant administrative work every single year, filling out applications, probation departments not knowing whether or not they're going to have the money sustained in the second year and all of those things. So there's lots of advantages and efficiencies to administratively trying to do that. We are also planning on moving forward to collapse all of our grant opportunities into one type of application. So right now we have an application for TCAP, an application for CCA, an application for JRIG, an application for probation services grants. And that puts a lot of administrative strain for those of you probably everybody on here has dealt with grants and had to do that. It's a lot of work on the grantees part, and it's a lot of work on our end getting all of that in and going through all of that. So it won't happen in 22-23, but we are looking at 24-25, trying to see if we can get to, here is DRC's grant opportunity for these things, and one type of application, get it in, and then answer it all and make it administratively better. The one thing that we are doing in terms of virtual programming, which is exciting, we just started it really this week. We have 2 virtual programs that I want to let you know about. One is, again, partnering with our halfway house agencies and partners and offering virtual programming to the Adult Parole Authority and our offenders on post-release control. Doing Teams virtual programming to those that are out in the community. So Thinking for a Change, anger management type programs, domestic violence programs, some substance abuse treatment and programming. So we have just started that. It is statewide. We have, I think, all but 2 of our halfway house partners are providing some sort of virtual programming. So we've pushed that out to the Adult Parole Authority. Right now, the referrals are coming in literally this week. We do have 1 or 2 programs that I think have started. So we're excited about that. That, and especially in some of our rural areas, as long as we have good internet connection, getting rid of the barrier of having to drive maybe, a county or 2 counties away in order to get to that programming. Right now, if a parole officer in Cincinnati sees a course that's being offered by a halfway house in Cleveland, it doesn't matter. It's available to whomever, and all they got to do is do the referral, and then hopefully we have good technology linkages. I think we're going to learn from that moving forward here, and that'll be one challenge moving forward that I'm expecting is, okay, we've got this virtual programming, we're delivering it, we're learning from that. How do we get to the people that don't have the internet services, don't have the smartphones with a camera? How do we deal with that, and how do we solve that problem? But that's something that's next step right now. I think our halfway house partners are ramping up. We're going to learn from this moving forward, and then obviously down the road also is going to be evaluation. was that effective? Is it more effective this way, or is it more that effective that way? Because to answer that next question also, and what things are going to stick around, I do believe the virtual programming is going to be here to stay. I mean, everything has shifted, and while there still will be in person, I think you're going to have to offer both in order to try to deal with the barriers that different individuals have, and give all of those different types of options. So that's the community PRC virtual programming. We also are rolling out February 1st virtual programming specifically to Lorain Correctional. And why Lorain Correctional? So Lorain Correctional has always been a reception center. So for those coming into prison, Lorain Correctional is the north, and then community CRC is the south. Essentially, when we have people on post-release control who are on supervision in the community, if they violate and they end up coming back to prison for short stays, the males would either go to CRC or Lorain, the females would go to ORW. And they would stay 90, 100, up to 270 days maximum, and then they would come back out into the community and be on supervision. Because of those short stays in the prisons, in the past, we have not been able to get them into our programming cycles that we deliver in prison. We had 50,000 people there. We have wait lists for virtually everything. And these post-release control violators are coming for such short stays. They basically would come in, do their sanction, and get back out on community or on post-release control, and the APA would pick them up and start working with them. So we're losing that opportunity while they're in prison. So we are now going to try to start delivering programming to post-release control violators. So Lorain went from being just a reception center to being the one place that we are returning all of our post-release control offenders who are male for the whole state. So before, if you were a violator in Cincinnati, you would be returned and go to CRC. Now you're going to end up all the way up in Lorain. So we're consolidating that. Now that we have that consolidation, that's why we're focusing specifically on Lorain Correctional. So our halfway house partners, we've developed virtual programming. We have 3 domestic violence sessions, 4 anger management sessions, 6 T4C sessions, 2 other cognitive behavioral sessions that are all going to be kicking off in February. And that's with 5 separate halfway house agencies. So we're excited about that. It's going to start February 1st. And again, I think we're going to learn a lot from that very quickly. We're already working on looking at how do we deliver services in this ways to other prisons, because we have high-risk population, high-risk offenders in some of our higher risk prisons that also need programming. So how do we push that in order to deliver more programming in our prisons? So that's I think a major focus, and something that we're really going to be working towards. Not necessarily a specific reentry initiative, but we are starting the halfway house and CBCF study. It's our 3rd study on those programs. OCJS was gracious enough to give the University of Cincinnati a grant to do this. The Ohio Community Corrections Association, the Halfway House Association really pushed this. So the last study we did was in 2010. So we're excited about that. That's going to be 2 years in the making, But again, it just kind of shows we're continuing to look at our programs and evaluate them in order to try to get better and focus on what we need to do. Moving on to that third question, and I'm not looking at the chat on purpose, so I don't know what's in there. I'll try to get through it, and then I'll circle back if anything's in there for me. How has the pandemic impacted services? So first, with our residential programs, it impacted it from the standpoint of everybody was worried about the pandemic, and these are all congregate settings. So our referrals were significantly impacted, residential settings. Also, DRC's prison population has significantly dropped. And speaking to the transitional control and treatment transfer population that Linda and Kelly mentioned in the very beginning, so courts, this is a generalized statement, but courts, when the pandemic hit, they started delaying sentencing, and obviously the lower level offenders, they pushed out further, or they kept them on probation. They kept them in the community. They didn't end up coming to prison. So I mention that because that lower level population is what feeds and drives transitional control and treatment transfer. So I guess one idea and thought about, if we want to look at expanding those programs, we need to look at expanding eligibility. If those 4s and 5 level felony level 4s and 5s are going to continue to stay out in the community, which they probably should, most of them, especially the nonviolent ones. We've got tons of programs to be able to deal with them out in the community. That's just off the top of my head when I saw that. That's the connection. The pandemic has lowered that population, lowered that pool of people that we can pull out. So if we want to expand, we may need to look at expanding that eligibility population in order to pull more into those programs. In terms of Bureau of Community Sanctions and impact, one of our roles is to go out into our programs, and we call them program reviews, but basically they're audits, right? We have standards, and we go out into the programs, we go into our residential programs, we go into the courts and the probation departments, and audit the standards, look at what they're doing, look at their day to day, and do all that. We haven't been able to do any of that since the beginning of the pandemic. However, we transitioned very quickly we looked at all of our standards and we said, there is definitely a big chunk of them that we can still do electronically. We developed an electronic process, worked with our programs and said, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to go through this process. We're going to ask for certain things, and you're going to submit them electronically. And that way we're able to at least continue to move on those set of standards. There are some that require us to actually be there. So those are the ones that we haven't been able to do. We may look at other ways if we can't get into the programs in doing that. Do we set up a phone with a video in that classroom in the corner and just have it live, and that's the way that we're watching and whether or not they're following the curriculum, how the programming is being delivered, etc. So that's something that we're looking at and exploring and thinking about. Hopefully we'll be able to go back out into the programs, but the practices carrying forward, we are going to keep those electronic submissions of our standards that we can. The basically feedback that we've gotten from our programs and from even my own staff is this works, it works well, it's efficient, we like it better, And then when we do get back out to go into the programs, we'll be able to focus and spend more time on those observations and not have to worry about those administrative type standards. So I think that'll allow us to coach and work with our programs a little bit more. So that I think is 100% locked in. That's what we're going to do moving forward. And I'm excited about that because I think we're going to benefit significantly from that.
Thanks, Chris. That does sound really exciting, and I don't mean to kind of jump in, but I want to make sure that we actually are over our presentation time. I think it was just great conversation. Everyone is drinking it up on the call. I am just beyond thrilled to have such great champions out there, right? Like, we're all facing this pandemic, and everyone on this call, presenting and listening is just so passionate about continuing to advocate for a path forward. And it's really great to hear about the creative strategies that people have implemented to continue to forge forward, to support reentry and diversion, and most importantly, to support the individuals that we all work alongside and with. And so that is just truly amazing and shows the strength of all of our agencies and all of us continuing to work together. And we hope that this sparked some thoughts from those listening on maybe how you can support reentry and diversion, or maybe some interest in participating in Linda and I's committee or the work groups, or just reaching in to, Roxanne, Kiston, Chris Nicastro, Chris Galley, and talking to them a little bit more about how you can support the efforts that they're doing. This just, I think, fuels all of us, and it's just great stuff. And I just really want to thank our panel members for coming on and for jumping in and participating and carving out time, which I know is such a valuable commodity these days. And I just want to thank you for your leadership, and forging your teams forward during all of this. Just great job. Thank you so much for everything.
Yeah, I think everybody on the call can see why we asked these, the four of who you've heard from today to sit on this panel. They truly are the experts and the leaders in the field. So I want to thank you as well. And Justice Stratton, we will go ahead and turn it back over to you to complete the rest of the agenda.
Again, I want to thank our wonderful panelists and all of our participants. This is an amazing turnout. We're really, really excited. And to know that there is just so much happening and so many caring and dedicated people. And for those of you on the call that are not on a committee, this is a great committee to join if you're interested in this. If you have more juvenile focus, we've got a juvenile, we've got an aging, we've got a law enforcement, we've got psychiatry and treatment. Chris Nicastro, who heads our specialized dockets. There's lots of opportunity for you to get engaged, to bring ideas for projects and programs, to tap the CARES funds and other funds that are coming down for these programs, the mental health block grant. So we are kind of at a fork where we have a lot of opportunities that have come out of the pandemic, but a lot more challenges to meet. So I hope all of you will not just look at this webinar and say, oh, this was very nice, but will actually get involved and participate. So thank you so much for Linda and Kelly. You put together an absolutely wonderful program. Thank you to our panelists for taking the time to prepare and be on the call and present. And with that, I'm going to turn over to Michael Sheline, who's my chief contact. He and Carrie Hertel with the AG Task Force, and special thanks to Carolyn Bevins as well, who runs all of the emails and gets the notices out and everything like that. Michael's going to give an update on the committee reports that he has received, and then I'm just going to let Michael close it out and finish the whole program up and send everyone home on their way. Michael, take it away.
Great. Thank you, Justice. I do have to say there is really kind of a strand among all of the committees that have been having a discussion around COVID-19 and how to react to certain challenges from each of those committees. So I'm going to go through some highlights. I'm not necessarily going to go into all COVID-19 kind of discussions, but what I hope is we can figure out with the new committee how to pull from all of these committees their ideas and thoughts and kind of put them together in one place and see how we can best assist in addressing some of those issues. I'll start with the Law Enforcement Committee, which reported that they've done a lot of work, especially with the committee member, Lieutenant Molly Harris from the Ohio State Highway Patrol, that has been working really since September of 2020 on training over 2,000 employees at OSP on the 16-hour CIT familiarization course. They've been working with subject matter experts across the state, including Ruth Samira and Officer Jeff Futo from the Kent State University Police Department. So they are really focused on the 40-hour course next, including all troopers, Ohio Investigative Unit agents, dispatchers, and motor carrier enforcement agents. The goal is to have them trained by 2021. The Law Enforcement Committee is also assisting the Ohio Police Officer Training Academy, also known as APATA, on developing training on de-escalation tactics. And after this is completed, the Law Enforcement Committee is going to work on kind of marketing and promoting this training to sheriff's offices and police officers through the Buckeye Sheriff's Association and the Ohio Association Chief of Police. And in May of 2021, Law Enforcement Committee Co-Chair Jeff Futo will be providing training for the Richland County Sheriff's Office regarding to responding to crisis calls and assisting with CIT training for probation officers throughout the state. The Veterans Committee has been working on a couple of things. They are currently working on finding a new co-chair. Their next meeting is scheduled for Wednesday, January 27th at 4 p.m. And they're going to be discussing the Law Enforcement Veterans Response Teams Initiative. Their last meeting in October, they had a presentation from Tom Cunningham, former state commander of the Military Order of the Purple Heart, and he gave a presentation on how military organizations can assist Ohio veterans treatment courts. So definitely a connection to specialty docket courts there. And also Justice Stratton previewed the 6th annual Veterans Summit, a virtual session entitled Lean Forward, Answering a Call to Veterans in Crisis. Seems like in the Housing Committee, a lot of focus on, of course, meeting the needs during this COVID situation, and a couple of the other points, various different, grant opportunities and some of the financing that they are working on there. Policy and legislation, again, really focused on COVID, but also something that I thought was really interesting of note is working on legislation, House Bill 36, and policy support around dyslexia screening in grades K through 5, which is something that is near to my heart, as that is something that I have lived with for a long time, and it would have been a lot easier had I been screened when I was a child. Research and best practices. They have been working on some of the CareSource project and data that they're collecting, merging jail and kind of health data sets. Again, the impact of COVID, and also some discussion around funding opportunities, which I think we'll kind of work to maybe follow up and send these out to all of our committee members. There's some interesting webinars and recordings that are talking about opportunities to improve crisis systems, upcoming webinar on best practices in antipsychotic medications in jails, free training through OMOS, the treatment of forensic clinic clients in a COVID environment. And regarding funding, funding is still available through the Office of Criminal Justice Systems. So I would definitely look at their website or contact Lisa Shove with any questions about this. Again, we definitely will try to put this together and send it out to all of the committee members so they have this information. I have a feeling there's, as Justice Stratton mentioned, there's going to be a lot of funding opportunities coming up, and some of them that have already existed that still have funding availabilities. So definitely want to be on the lookout for those. I got a couple of corrections. Thank you very much that it is House Bill 36 and regarding the dyslexia screening, and actually includes grades kindergarten through 3rd grade. So thank you for making those adjustments. I'm hoping, you know, we may not be able to have our next meeting in person. We may do this again. We're going to try to put together some way to collect some key points from all of the subcommittees that we can better communicate what's going on in each of the subcommittees if we have this meeting virtual once again. I certainly miss the ability that each person could present from their subcommittee and really talk about what they're doing, because I think that that really gives us a good idea from the people that are actually doing the work. So we're going to work a little bit more before this next meeting, should it be virtual, and kind of collect some bullet points that we can better present what each of these committees are doing in relation to their work. I want to welcome the new committee, currently called the Surge Committee, but we'll be looking for a different title for that. They will have a meeting soon. We look forward to the next time we meet, them presenting on the work that they're doing. Should be exciting. This is something that was really important to the Attorney General. He's really been thinking a lot about the effects of this pandemic over the last year on mental health, addiction, domestic violence, clear across the board. And I think we all understand we're going to see an uptick on top of what we were already trying to work through. Thank you for joining us again today. This was a great presentation, and we will look forward to seeing you at the next meeting. Thank you.